Rules Committee to come to order, and good evening and welcome back. Tonight at the Rules Committee, we're considering H.R. 6392, the Systematic Risk Designation Improvement Act of 2016, and the Senate Amendment to H.R. 34 containing the 21st Century Cures Act. H.R. 6392, the Systematic Risk Designation Improvement Act of 2016, is a critical and bipartisan piece of legislation that will help get our economy moving again and free commercial banks to make loans without unnecessary and artificial regulatory disruptions. I would like to take a moment and commend Chairman Luke DeMeyer from Missouri and his staff for working to reverse this arbitrary threshold. I personally worked with him to ensure that this thoughtful legislation would move forward, and he did an excellent job in building the bipartisan coalition behind it. Under the current regulatory framework for the designation of systematically important financial institutions, risk is determined based solely on the asset side of an institution. Any bank, holding company, or other financial organization with more than $50 billion in assets is subject to enhanced regulatory supervision and special assessments. This approach fails to take into account differences in business model or risk posed to the financial system. Regulation based on arbitrary numbers alone tells us very little about the risk an institution poses to the United States system. SIFI designations of bank holding companies should be driven by risk, not asset side alone. Assets thresholds, regardless of how high or low, are disincentives to growth. H.R. 6392 requires that for purposes of determining systematic importance, the Financial Stability Oversight Council use the indicator-based measurement approach based on the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision when it identifies global systematic important banks. Differentiating between stable activities and those that could threaten the financial stability of the United States would allow the Financial Stability Oversight Council to more precisely identify systematic importance while providing flexibility for institutions engaged in more prudent lending activities. Now, to the amendment and the business at hand based upon the witnesses who we have. The committee will also consider Senate Amendment to H.R. 34 containing the 21st Century Cures Act. This legislation brings our healthcare infrastructure into the 21st century, delivering what I believe is much-needed hope for patients and their loved ones. It accelerates the growth of discovering, developing, and delivering new cures and treatments that ensures that America remains the global leader in biomedical innovation. The bill provides a once-in-a-generation opportunity to help researchers change the way that disease is fought. It is often said that success has many fathers. Well, 4 of those, so to speak, fathers or mothers are sitting around the table here at the Rules Committee today. I want to thank, in particular, my big brother in Congress, the gentleman from Michigan, Fred Upton, the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, for his long-time leadership to make sure that this is available to us on a bipartisan basis. Obviously, Ranking Member Pallone from New Jersey is joining us today, and I know that Mrs. DeGette is delighted to be with us. I know that there were lots of conversation that have taken place over the last few weeks as this bill was finally put together. So I want to thank each of you for being here today. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be inserted in the record, and we look forward to your testimony. Before we go any further, I want to yield to the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for any opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome the panelists to the committee. And, the 21st Century Cures Act is something that a lot of us have been following for quite some time. And I'm looking forward to your testimony because I just got back and I'm looking through the bill, and I have some concerns, quite frankly. Unless I'm reading this wrong, I mean, this bill authorizes the NIH for a quarter of the funding that was in the original bill that was passed in the House last year. As I read it, the bill also cuts FDA budget in half. money is now subject to appropriations, and there's no guarantee that the appropriations will follow through with the funding each year, which would severely hinder the NIH's ability to conduct the crucial research. And then the other thing is how this is paid for. I'm being told that a lot of this is coming out of the ACA's prevention fund, which means that monies that were going for diabetes prevention, cancer screenings, stroke prevention are going to be impeded. So I hope that that there's you could calm my fears here, but that's just a quick reading when I came back, and I look forward to hearing from you. But I don't know whether I want to yield to the ranking member.
Oh, no, you finished, and then
And
I'll
I'm-
speak if that's okay.
and I'm all
with
done.
Mr. Hastings. No, you're not.
Yeah, no, and I'm
You
done
sure?
with. I'm all done. Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry I'm late, but you can't get off the phone now, am I right? Listen, I'm glad to see all of you here this afternoon. I know that an awful lot of work has gone into this bill, but you have left a couple things out that trouble me. One is a bill that I have an amendment on to try to put back in. It was morcellation, medical device that was used for fibroid tumors that caused many, many women to die of cancer because the way the thing operated, it morcellated the tumors and spread cancer cells that people often didn't know were present. We had several women die in Rochester for it. And this is really very important, that we can do something about the FDA making certain that that is either not going to be used on women anymore, or that it will be made in such a way that it would be safe and not. But the whole process, I think, is serious. So we have an amendment to put it back in, Mr. Chair. If I hope you look on that favorably. It's bipartisan amendment.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the opening statement from two of my colleagues, and I'm delighted that you're here. Louise, you look good.
Feeling good, John? How about you? Looking
couldn't-
really sharp in that sweater.
Couldn't be much. Yeah, that's what
This
happens when
Texas is all get it.
you come up here and it's cold. I know you live in the cold, but
Wait a minute.
I mean, I came up here and it's cold, so
I see. So it wasn't my fault.
There's nobody's.
Oh, all
I
right.
blamed you.
Then,
yet.
okay.
I blamed you. Got a full house. Want to make sure our microphones are on to where we can hear each other. We're going to try not to talk over each other. We're going to really, yes, ma'am.
I just didn't want to interrupt you so much, but I didn't get an answer from Mr. Upton. I think he was about to say something
Well, I
about my
wanted to
question
just
there.
check, as
Yeah.
it related to your question, it was not part of the bill that we passed last year. We passed
We
HR
understood that
6,
it was.
344 to 77.
Not, Diane,
No,
no?
that was a Fitzpatrick provision, but it was not.
Can we put it in?
I think it'd be difficult at this point to
Will
put it
it?
in. But remember, the FDA, I mean, they have the full authority to withdraw devices and from the marketplace.
They had the
Yes.
full authority to stop people from feeding
do.
antibiotics
We
to
don't take
cattle
that
and
away.
poultry every
Yeah.
afternoon too, but they didn't do it.
So,
but
but it was
okay.
not part of the
All
bill
right.
that we passed before.
That's a great
Which is what I was
disappointment to
checking
me
with my
because
staff.
numbers of women who died in my area, in my district, and I'm sure Mr. Fitzpatrick's as well. But thank you very much.
And Mr. Fitzpatrick has been an ample and very, very able ally with you on this.
Yes, he has.
We will miss Michael, too. Okay, now we're going to have a Rules Committee meeting, and we're going to first go to the gentleman from Michigan, and the gentleman's now recognized.
I'm going to try to be very brief. I'm going to submit my statement for the record, as you indicated. This bill takes together a number of provisions. It's a little longer than the bill that we had that passed last summer because we've included the mental health bill led by Dr. Murphy, which passed the House 422 to 2. And we also included some Ways and Means provisions that passed by a voice vote on the House floor this last summer. Basically, as we know, and we'll be glad to take whatever questions that you might have, this bill does a number of things. It breaks down the regulatory barriers that hamper the sharing of patient data for research purposes. It modernizes the rules governing clinical trials. It restructures parts of the FDA to better reflect how modern therapies are delivered. And it authorizes new regulatory pathways that produce faster approval of breakthrough medical devices. I have to say it's been a whirlwind number of days in the last few days as we have all talked to each other It was almost like we were over at Thanksgiving at each other's houses with the calls that we took at all hours of the day working this out. It is bipartisan, though there is not a White House SAP that I'm aware of at this point. I don't expect that they will be anything other than supportive. We've worked on pay-fors for this bill. We have worked to make sure that over a 10-year span, the monies that the pay-fors will match the increased spending levels. And we've taken into account a number of the president's priorities, including opioids, including, and I left my sheet in the car, but opioids, the brain, cancer moonshot, which of course Vice President Biden has been very anxious to work on. And we include an increase in the FDA, so of $500 million over the 10-year span. So we feel that we're on good footing. We've talked to a number of senators today on both sides of the aisle, and I think that we're in good shape, particularly if we were able to have a strong vote tomorrow like we expect, and to move it through the Senate as quickly as we can before we adjourn. And I yield to my ranking member, Mr. Pallone, for...
Thank you very much. Mr. Pallone, you're now recognized.
I wanted to, I'm going to take a little more time, but not a lot of time. I don't disagree with anything that my chairman said, but I do want to address, some of the concerns that Mr. McGovern had. First of all, let me say that, as Mr. Upton said, the underlying bill, the 21st Century Cures bill, passed the House, last year, overwhelmingly, both Democrats and Republicans. The new bill has changed the underlying bill somewhat, but not a great deal. And it's adding funding to try to address opiates, which was a package that we passed and the president signed in July, but didn't really have much in the way of funding. And also the cancer moonshot, which the president, the vice president have been championing for some time. And the mental health package that also passed the House, did not pass the Senate. So, this has become more of a catch-all bill now. It's not just the original 21st Century Cures. Now, what I want to say about 21st Century Cures, though, is this. I want to thank both Fred Upton and Diana DeGette for going around the country. I don't know if many of you realize, but they've literally spent 2 or 3 years going around the country, having forums all over the place. I went to one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in Amish country, and they basically got input from the people, if you will, in a very unique way. And, a lot of the people that were at these forums said, look, there are a lot of diseases out there where we're not making a lot of progress, either because, it's difficult to get drugs or medical devices to market, or because we're not spending enough money on research. And so this is a response to that in a very serious way. And it's both a substantive response in the way, we approve things, as well as a response in terms of trying to provide more money. And overall, I think this is a good bill, and I support it. But I did want to mention a few things. I mean, the total amount of funding is not what it was. In other words, the total amount of funding was more like $8.75 billion in the original over 5 years. Now we're down to, I guess, 6.3, if you will, over 10 years. The original bill that passed the House was 8.7, but it was over 5 years. And this one now is 6.3 over 10 years, okay? But again, so there's still $4.8 billion in new funding for NIH, but we have $1 billion for opiates, and we have a $1.8 billion for cancer moonshot. So, Mr. McGovern's right that the amount of money specifically for NIH is less, but we've added money that we didn't have before for the cancer moonshot and for the opiates, and we do have $500 million in additional money for the FDA. But the main thing that I want to stress to you is I know that there has been some concern about whether the underlying bill is sacrificing safety or for approvals or that type of thing. And I want to assure you that I don't believe that that's true. I believe that even though there's very innovative ways of dealing with drugs and devices, that I do think that we don't have a safety problem here. It's just a way of trying to to address these cures in a more effective way, the way the public has asked for it, without sacrificing any safety. And there's some, if you give you an idea of kind of the underlying provisions that will move us in the direction of more cures, we have data sharing amongst the NIH that wasn't there before. We have a lot more diversity requirements to improve the number of women and racial minorities that, are for clinical trials. We have interoperability provisions because, as you know, electronic health records are often critical to reducing costs. So it's those kind of things, improving interoperability, improving diversity, improving data sharing, that are going to make it, in my opinion, more likely that we find cures for things that we haven't in the past. Now, I know that you mentioned, Mr. McGovern, I think you mentioned the funding. I mean, the original bill did have mandatory funding. I can't say that there is mandatory funding here anymore. There is a process whereby the speaker and the appropriators are basically pushed, if you will, to provide this funding, okay? So it's not just that they're going to appropriate the money, but it is possible that they could change their mind and not appropriate it. I mean, that is true. It is primarily an authorizing bill. It doesn't have mandatory funding. But we have a mechanism to try to push the appropriators, and we're going to have to rely on, Fred and Diana and myself to make sure that this happens over the next few years. The other thing I should say is that, there are certain things in here that I do worry about. For example, since the FDA has to take on a lot more functions, it probably would have been better for the FDA to have more money than the 500, because they do take on a lot of functions, and, there's some question about whether they're going to be able to do that with the level of funding that's available. But again, this is a compromise. This is something that the Democrats and the Republicans tried to work on. And so I don't want to stress the negatives too much, but I do want to say that there are some things in here that, you would worry about whether or not there's going to be adequate funding to actually deliver. The other thing that I did want to also mention is I know there's been some concern about this whole regenerative medicine product. In other words, I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but let me say that regenerative medicine product basically uses your own cells or someone else's cells to create a unique treatment, almost like a precision medicine type thing based on your genetics. I know you've been very concerned about that. We have, in my opinion, worked on that language so that it's okay now. Okay? In other words, there was some concern whether the FDA was going to approve these types of things without really knowing a lot about it. And I think we still give the FDA the option of deciding, in the case of regenerative medicines, whether or not they want to approve it.
Because I do have one here.
Sure.
It sounds like very exciting, and we certainly like to do that, but we have heard some people, there have been some really complex problems attached to it. Loss of vision, tumor development, that should be regulated responsibly, but the bill calls for it to be rushed ahead, right? Am I right
Well, I
about
think
that?
again,
Or am I over?
no, I think you're
Yeah.
being fair, and this goes back to what Jim said as well. I think you have to understand that, and when Diana and Fred went around and listened to people, they were basically coming up at these forums with new ideas, okay? And the regenerative medicine is a totally new idea, right?
It's a great one,
So the
yeah.
FDA is like, well, it's in its formative stages. We'd like to have some oversight and some ability to reject some of these proposals if we think they're a little too innovative without having had any, enough work. But I think that the way the language is written now, that's basically the case, that the FDA
That
is not-
they do have
they
that ability,
to
okay.
veto it, in my opinion. So that's what I wanted to essentially assure you. Now, the last thing I wanted to say about the mental health bill, I think that this is a very positive thing. This was worked out on a bipartisan basis as well. But again, the negative side is that there's no money for it. Okay, we authorize a lot of new grant programs for crisis response, for suicide, for we have a Medicaid provision that expands a set of Medicaid benefits to kids receiving inpatient psychiatric treatment. So these are great things and great grant programs, but we don't have any money. And of course, I will say, and I'm sure that my Republicans are not going to be happy with this, if they go ahead, you guys go ahead on the Republican side and repeal the ACA, all that we're trying to do here with this mental health bill, in my opinion, is essentially going to be meaningless because there isn't going to be any coverage for mental health care. And I know we're not supposed to be talking about that today, but I'm going to be honest with you and say that, this is a great bill, and we worked on it a lot, but it's not going to be worth much if we repeal the Affordable Care Act. So overall, I want to stress to you that this is not a perfect bill. It's not one that I would have written, but I do think overall this is a good bill. I support it. I urge my colleagues on the Democratic side to support it. You know, we're in a divided government here. We won't be for long. But for the last 2 years, we've had a divided government. We've got to work things out. The bottom line is that Fred and Diana have spent a lot of time trying to find ways to come up with things that were innovative and trying to find the funding to pay for it. And I think overall, that's what they've accomplished here. And I feel that, you know, myself and Tim Murphy, all of us have been an important part of this. And so I recommend that we support it wholeheartedly. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. Diana, I'm going to let you go ahead and chime
Thank
in
you
here.
very
We're
much.
we're expecting Mr. T-Berry, who would be here from the Ways and Means Committee, to be here, but I will go from you to Dr. Murphy, even if Mr. T-Berry gets here in between. Gentleman's
Thank you very
recognized.
much, Mr. Chairman. I won't repeat everything that my colleagues have said, except for to thank both of them, especially Fred, for working so hard with me as a partner to find these cures that will really expedite treatments for people who have no hope right now. What I think would be useful for me to do is to talk about a few issues that have come up at this hearing, just to clarify. The first one is the FDA budget. As you know, in this new version that we have worked very hard, not just with us, but also with the Senate Democrats and Republicans, the White House, and the agencies, the FDA gets $500 million. Now, just to be clear, that's the amount of money that the FDA said that they would need to enforce this bill. Originally in the bill, it was $300 million, and thanks to the efforts of the White House and to us, frankly, it's been raised up to $500,000. So it is the amount that the FDA thinks that they need to enforce this bill. Secondly, with respect to the mechanism for which we pay, I want to say, as you've heard, the original cures that passed in July of 2015 was $8.75 billion over 5 years, as you heard. This bill now is in mandatory spending, this bill is $6.3 billion, and it's sort of a hybrid. It's frankly something that we put our heads together because there was resistance, not on our side of the aisle, but on the Republican side of the aisle, to having mandatory spending. And so this is a little bit of a hybrid that we haven't done before. What we do is we authorize the money, we find the offsets, and then we basically set up a lockbox where we say, okay, once this money is authorized, then and the offsets are there, then it can't be rated and spent for anything else. So we feel that that really sets up some guardrails that this money will be spent for carrying out the bill. The other thing is that we were able to negotiate in conjunction with the White House front-loading for a lot of the priorities that we have in this bill. So the opioid money of $800 million will be spent in the first couple of fiscal years of this bill, as well as the money for the Cancer Moonshot Initiative. So all of that money will be going out initially. But frankly, you know, as I say all the time in the speeches I make about this bill, disease doesn't just affect Republicans or Democrats. It affects every family in this country. And this Congress has a long bipartisan tradition of putting money into the NIH. In last year's omnibus bill, for example, there was a $2 billion bump up in the money for the FDA. So we feel quite certain that this money will be spent. And finally, I will say that with respect to the regenerative medicine issue, which I know Congresswoman Slaughter cares about, there was a proposal by the Senate called the Regrow Act. Nobody in the House liked it. Fred didn't like it. I didn't like it. The administration was concerned. Regenerative medicine has a lot of potential, but we have to make sure that we value safety and efficacy first. And so we actually worked with the FDA to come up with these regenerative medicine standards, and these standards have been signed off by the agencies, by the White House, and by the House and Senate committees. We feel that they really are going to both allow this research where appropriate, but not just give a blank check. So those are some of the issues that I know have come up, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. It's an exciting bill. What I'm happy about is all the guts that Fred talked about of how we restructure the way we do biomedical research in this country. Even if we didn't have a penny, which I'm glad we do have 6.3 billion of them, even if we didn't have a penny, the restructuring that we do in this bill of our agencies and the way we do biomedical research is really going to bring that hope for the millions of patients who don't have that hope now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gett. The other major part of this bill is one that has been worked on for a number of years. And Dr. Murphy, I really want to offer a congratulations to you. You and I, some nights when we would meet late at night, we would talk about this bill and about your willingness to give your best ideas, not only to the Congress, but also your time that you have spent at Bethesda Naval Hospital and being a part of, as a reservist for the United States Navy. And I think that you spent a good bit of your time perfecting not only your ideas, but about the actual usage of that on men and women who had faced traumatic circumstances in their life, sometimes what might be called TBI and other circumstances, but to deal with the overall mental health of a person and a family. And I really know that your young chairman, Fred Upton, has encouraged you over these years in a way for you to continue. But I want you to know I'm proud of you for what you have done, because I've watched you over the years, and the gentleman's now recognized to defend his product.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Slaughter, and other members of this committee. Yes, I've had Navy duty today and yesterday, and again, I saw some of our warriors who have been the visible and invisible wounds of war and trying to recover from those, and that has helped me stay sharp and be keenly aware of how pervasive mental illness and troubles are in America, but reminding me also that with proper help, people can and do get better. I want to show you these. These are what has been my inspiration for the last several years. These are on my desk, and every day I see these kids. We're coming up on the 4th anniversary of the slaughter of those kids from Sandy Hook Elementary School. So every day I see Dylan Hockley there, and I see Benjamin Wheeler, and I see Daniel Barden, among others, whose only goal that day was maybe to get a decent lunch and go home and play, but struck too soon down by a man with untreated mental illness. And that horror is etched on our collective memory. And there's a lot of other cities where we recognize this has happened, in Tucson, and Colorado Springs, and Lafayette, and Charlotte, Chattanooga, Dallas, Houston, Rosenberg, Isla Vista, the Navy Yard, even near my own district at Franklin Regional High School. The body count and the tragedy is more than just these instances. What really brings this to light is that we are dealing with a mental health crisis in America. And much of this is due to a failed, disjointed, less than effective federal approach. 1 in 5 Americans will experience mental illness, and 10 million with a serious mental illness, and 40% of those get no treatment at all. There are no psychologists, psychiatrists, and clinical social workers in over half the counties in America. And this body count gets so high that if you take those who died of suicide last year, 43,000, drug overdoses, 47,000, the 1,000 that were in a homicide, the 250 who died in a violent police encounter, and those who died 10 to 25 years sooner because of a chronic illness associated with mental illness, the body count in America last year was 350,000. 1 year, in 2015. That is more deaths related to mental illness than the entire U.S. combat deaths of World War I, Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan combined. 1 year. And that doesn't even mention its $500 billion cost to our nation. $500 billion. Well, we're finally going to deal with this by providing a bill that will deal with the shortage of psychiatrists, psychologists, the beds. It deals with eating disorders. It cleans up a system that has gone awry. It recognizes that among Hispanics with a mental disorder, fewer than 1/11 see a mental health specialist. There's a nationwide shortage of 100,000 psychiatric beds. And the list goes on of our problems. But the point is, this bill deals with it in a comprehensive way. It has been a long battle for this. And quite frankly, I think at the beginning, very few gave any hope that this would ever come through. But in the words of Kevin McCarthy, we have taken the impossible and made it the inevitable. And a lot of thanks goes to people sitting beside me at this table. Fred Upton stepped up here, and Fred, you did a lot of tremendous work on that. Diana, who sits next to me on our investigation committee, you saw these tragedies, person after person coming through with tearful experiences. And to the Ranking Member Frank Pallone, I want to assure you that let's work together to make sure these things get funded, because without the money, we can't put many of these things into process. But still, this bill is transformational. Many still recognize it as the most transformational mental health bill in the last 50 years, and every member here who has worked on it and given support, they can go home and say we have changed the national dialogue, where it's no longer stigmatizing to talk about this, but something we recognize we have an obligation to deal with this. And no longer are we going to run away. I know I visited 20 cities in 15 states and held town hall meetings with members on both sides of the aisle, would go and talk about this. And in every case, audiences were packed with people telling their story, their tragedies. We had thousands of letters. We had 3 million Facebook interactions, about 80 newspaper editorials, 207 co-sponsors of the bill. And one group even sent us a 400-foot-long petition of thousands of families telling their stories. Well, we are now at the point where we can do something about it. It's been a long and difficult road. It started with hearings. It went through legislative proposals, amendments, collaboration, and then consensus, and finally a vote. I might add, this is how Congress is supposed to work. So while people may be criticizing us, we can't work together, this is an example of doing this. And one I think that, although we still are pained by the tragedies involved here, to recognize that people teamed together and made this happen, because although we didn't always have agreement on how we did this, there was never any doubt that we knew we had to do this, and we got there. In the end, we didn't get everything we needed, but we needed everything we got. And that is something that I think has changed the trajectory in America. And one very important thing we got is a newfound hope for those families who truly needed help because of their mental health crisis. So I thank this committee for moving it forward. I thank the members who helped with this. And again, a special tip of the hat to my colleagues here at the table from the Energy and Commerce Committee. People worked very hard. But I have no doubt at the end of the many bills we deal with, this is one where members can go back to their constituents and say, today we did something which we know will save lives in the very near future. I yield back.
Dr. Murphy, thank you very much. Mr. T-Berry, welcome. We're delighted that you've joined us today. The gentleman from Ways and Means Committee had a special big smile on his face. This happens in October, Mr. T-Berry. It happens in Dallas, Texas, when Mr. Cole smiles at me, and then I grin back. But more than not, that's the way it goes. I know it's the way it is sometimes with you too, but you have been a part of making sure that this package gets together on a bipartisan basis, bicameral basis, and I know you have important information not only to provide to us. I engaged your young chairman, Mr. Brady, just this afternoon on certain pieces of that, and I know that that will be included in part of your discussion with us. The gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Slaughter. It's a great opportunity. Thank you for giving me that opportunity today to talk about this incredible piece of legislation, 21st Century Cures. I'm here to actually speak on the division that the Ways and Means Committee's jurisdiction is in, and that's Division C, increasing choice, access, and quality in health care for all Americans. Legislation is an excellent example of what we can achieve when we work together, both Democrats and Republicans, to advance people's priorities through an open, inclusive legislative process. The Division of Cures, this Division of Cures, is made up of 10 separate pieces of legislation, all of which were bipartisan pieces of legislation that went through regular order in either the House or the Senate. Division C would increase health care choices, access, and affordability for the American people. First, the division removes regulations affecting hospitals, outpatient facilities, and ambulatory surgical centers so individuals and families can quickly access quality care. This was done through striking the right balance of preserving the site-neutral payment policy and providing essential relief for hospitals that were caught up in this mid-bill policy change from last year's budget deal last November. This also postpones regulations like the 25% rule that would make it more difficult for long-term care hospitals, LTACs, which treat patients suffering from the most severe illnesses and injuries to deliver quality care. Second, it improves access to quality health care choices for seniors and small businesses. The division strengthens transparency and protects patients enrolled in Medicare Advantage from abruptly losing their coverage and removes the last, quote, pre-existing condition or restriction so patients with kidney failure can enroll in this popular program. In addition, it allows small employers to provide a competitive health benefit to their employees, known as health reimbursement accounts, or HRAs. Finally, Mr. Chairman, it helps America's most vulnerable by strengthening supports for hospitals that treat cancer patients, low-income patients, and rural patients, as well as delaying cuts of suppliers of complex rehab technology, accessories, and certain durable medical equipment suppliers. It ensures access to care in rural areas through reauthorizing the Rural Hospital Demonstration Program, alleviating a restriction that would put a strain on doctors at critical access hospitals, lifting barriers to participation in accountable care organizations, ACOs, or allowing a qualified substitute therapist to ensure continuum of care if a patient's physical therapist is unable to provide the care. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank the gentleman from Michigan, the Wolverine fan, Chairman Upton, and Chairman Brady for their leadership on this really important piece of legislation, and I'm grateful for you giving me the opportunity, and this committee giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to defer my questions to the end. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the conflict in meeting times, but I want to thank you all for being here. I know all of you have worked on this a lot. We were on a conference call this afternoon with homes in my district who take care of abused children who had called us yesterday and today about a section of the bill that they were very concerned about. And we talked with them, and actually while we were talking, we found out that had been removed, and we're very happy about that. I know there's conflicting thoughts on it.
Can I just interrupt the gentleman for a moment? Your senator called me as well, and we just thought that we would just voice concern about North Carolina.
Right. And I just want to tell you that I am well aware of the work that these facilities do. I did a lot of volunteer work several years ago with one of them. And I know how hard they work to get foster homes established. It is one of their primary focuses. But I'm not sure how much you are aware of how difficult it is to get foster homes. So there are many, again, facilities and many people out there working on this who want the children placed in good foster homes. And so I hope that the committees will look at this issue in the future and look for ways to support the really, really fine programs going on out there, taking care of children who have been physically, sexually, mentally abused in many cases in their own homes, and at the work they do to put them back into their homes and also into foster homes. I told my folks today I'm probably a little more intimately aware than many other members are because of my involvement with one of these facilities and my husband's involvement over the years. But there are some great places out there. And I assured them that they would have time to make their case now for why a one-size-fits-all doesn't apply. So I just want to thank you all for withdrawing that particular piece of the bill, because I do think it would have done damage had it not been able to be adjusted. So thank you all very much, and thanks for your work. I'm also on the side of the Angels, I think, on other aspects of this bill. So I'm very glad to see those aspects going forward. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my questions have pretty much been answered, but I do want to say to Representative Murphy, I really appreciate the comments that you made and the information you brought us this afternoon. It's very important, and any help I could ever give, you're working on that, I'd be more than pleased to do it. And I thank you for your good work, and I'm going to take the ranking member's suggestion and support this bill. So thank you all very much.
Chairman Cole?
Thank you very much. I want to begin by noting we do see Democrats and Republicans come up here together, but we very seldom see Ohio State and Michigan people come up here. So this really is quite a.
I'm glad that he's wearing a blue shirt, you know.
Well, I know who's grinning. Okay, so but it's great to have you guys here. And seriously, I want to echo everybody else's compliments to all of you. I mean, this has been a monumental and very important work. We tend to focus on the money, and that's clearly important. But I think the regulatory reform that you have in here is going to save the country billions and billions of dollars and deliver much better care, much more expeditiously to our fellow Americans and, frankly, to people all over the world. So thank you very much. I want to assure, I know there are always some concerns about will the money be appropriated the way that you want it appropriated. This happens to be the subcommittee I chair. We put $2 billion in last year on NIH, and had we finished this year, there would have been an additional $2 billion, not counting the resources that you guys are making available here. So I actually would tell you that the greater concern would be that we just take your money and not continue to build the discretionary funds on top, because your money will run out at some point. And that has always been my greatest fear, that we're building a cliff out there. But if we'll continue a bipartisan commitment, I think we have it, to continue to build up the discretionary funding, then, you know, this is going to be new troops to the fight, so to speak, on top of what we were doing. And I can assure you, I know my counterparts in the Senate feel the same way. We're not only going to fulfill the commitment and spend the money that you've made available the way that you intend it to be spent, that we're going to try and put additional discretionary funding on top of that. So it's a great disappointment to me this year that we're doing a CR, because we literally had another $2 billion increase written, ready, agreed to, and signed off on. So it's a mystery to me why we didn't do that. The other thing I would tell you, rather than worry too much about the appropriators, the really critical element for us will be what's the overall budget top line, because NIH is put in about $163 billion worth of spending authority. It's about 32. And so if all of a sudden you reduce what's going to labor aids dramatically, I mean, you're not going to be able to increase certain portions and then decrease others, although to get the increases we've had the last 2 years, that's what we've done. But so, I mean, the budget itself will become the critical item in determining whether we can continue to build on the discretionary part of the really excellent work you guys have accomplished here. And, we'll see where we end up. I particularly want to thank my friend, Mr. Murphy. You talk late into the night with Chairman Sessions, but when you're late in the night with me, it usually involves, Irish whiskey and cigars. And so I'm sure our conversations at least seem much more productive. I'm not sure they are, but this is really a seminal piece of work. But it will present a real challenge because, as all of you have pointed out, the money's got to come from someplace, and that's discretionary funding, and that's appropriate. I think this is a really good bill, and we're going to sit down and work with my friend and see what we can do to make sure that the funds are behind it to start down. Now, again, I will just caution everybody, depending on the number we get, that means cut someplace else. And that's the hard part of this bill. I remember from an appropriator standpoint, talking to one of my Democratic colleagues last year, and I always call the Labor H bill catnip to Democrats because they love everything in the bill. And my frustrated colleague said, Mr. Chairman, you just have different priorities. And I said, no, I just have fewer priorities. You're not against any place we're spending extra money. You're actually all for it. You want that money at IH. You want extra money at TRIO. You want extra money at Gear Up. There's not a place we put money that you don't want that money there. We just have a top line we got to live within, so we're going to have to make some tough choices. So I would just urge you on both sides of the aisle to help us make those tough choices, to encourage your colleagues. Because I think you're absolutely right. I think Ms. DeGette hit it right on. This is not a partisan issue. Disease doesn't make that kind of distinction. This is something the American people want us to do overwhelmingly. They want us to work together on. You guys have done this in this bill. Like my friend Mr. Pallone pointed out, in a bill this major, you can always disagree over something. There's always something there you'd like to have done differently if you got to write it yourself. None of us get to do that with any pieces of legislation. We have to work across the aisle. We have to work with the members of our committee. We have to work across the rotunda with the United States Senate. We have to work with the administration. So it's never going to be what any one of us would do. But I think you guys have put together really important legislation and have fought it all the way through. And to do that in this divided and divisive era in politics, and to put, I think, the bigger good, in front of all else is something you all should be proud of. Mr. Chairman, this particularly a tremendous tribute to you and a capstone achievement, honestly, in a very distinguished career, not just as your chairman, but in many, many years in this House, where you've always been a leader and you've always brought people together. And boy, you did it this time. And again, I compliment your Democratic colleagues, Diane, you especially, but I know, Frank, how hard you guys worked on this too. It's a big deal. And so with that, I just want to reassure you, we will put the money where you ask us to, at least as long as I'm chairman there. And we'll try to find additional resources to marry with what you've done here. And we're particularly pleased that you went where we can't go and dealt with the tough regulatory issues, the tough policy questions, to make sure that the dollars we have are going to be spent a lot more efficiently. And just help us find some money to make sure that Mr. Murphy's really excellent work isn't just a matter of being, great policy, but it's actually got the resources behind it that we can begin to change lives. I know how hard he's worked on that. So great effort, great bill. I look forward to supporting it on the floor and look forward to working with all of you as we implement this going forward over several years.
Mr. Chairman, on that, the difficulty you have reminds me of the fellow who goes into a pub, and he says, bartender, I'd like 6 Guinnesses, 6 Jamesons, and 6 Bailey Irish creams. And the bartender brings them over and says, would you like a tray to take that back to your table? The fellow says no, and he then proceeds to chug down the 6 Guinnesses, the 6 Jamesons, and the 6 Bailey Irish creams in a matter of a minute. The bartender says to him, my gosh, what's wrong with you? I can't believe it. Is there something troubling you? He says, well, you drink that fast, too, if you got what I've got. And the bartender, trying to show sympathy, says to him, what is it you've got? He says, I've only got $1.
I'm not going to try and top that. I yield back.
Mr. McGovern?
Well, I want to thank all, I know how hard all of you have worked on this, and there's some really good things in this bill. There's no doubt about that. And I have some concerns. I am concerned about the NIH funding part of this thing, and I'm going to have to study this tonight and talk to some people to have them allay my concerns. But I have some other concerns as well. But I like you all too much to spend any time on that.
Let me just say, we've had a good number of conversations with the outstanding leader of the NIH, Dr. Collins, and I can tell you that he is most excited about what we've done with this bill and with the bipartisan work that the appropriators are going to do to make sure that the funding is going to be delivered. We work hand in glove
I
with them.
appreciate that. But as I did a precursory look at this bill, I do have some concerns, and we'll try to work them out before it comes to the floor. So thank you, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want anybody to suggest that conservatives think this is a perfect bill either. We've done a good job of not nitpicking. I was ready to get excited about it until Frank gave such a great rebuttal to all the concerns that were up here on the dais, and I thought, golly, if Frank's on board, I'm on board. I'm on board too. The truth is, Mr. Chairman, when you chair the committee that has more jurisdiction than any other committee on Capitol Hill, I kind of expect you to be successful, right? I expect you to get across the finish line, and what a great piece of legislation you have done, and you came back time and time again to get it across that finish line. But the truth is, when I go back home and tell stories to constituents, They don't want to hear about successful committee chairmen. They want to hear about successful guys who are just subject matter experts, right? We all come from a different background around here, and you want to believe that diversity gets us something. And in Dr. Murphy, it gets us something we don't get in any other member in this institution. I can think of Republican conference after Republican conference after Republican conference, Dr. Murphy, where you took to the microphone and you sold it. You didn't sit back and wait for folks to see how smart you were. You sold it every single day to anybody who would listen. And if folks didn't want to hear about it, they wouldn't sit beside you, because if sitting beside Dr. Tim Murphy means you're going to hear about the mental health bill.
That's how it happened in committee as well.
The chairman knows. Folks want to believe that that this place is leadership driven, and good ideas don't have a chance unless they have a leadership patron. You brought this bill last Congress, got just over 100 co-sponsors. You sold and sold and sold. You brought it back this conference. You got over 200 co-sponsors. One of your original co-sponsors sitting over here at the other end of the dais in Alcee Hastings out of Florida, and you wouldn't take no for an answer because you knew you were right. And for all the young members who are going to get sworn in on January 3rd, knowing that if you have a good idea and you refuse to take no for an answer, sometimes sooner and sometimes later, but eventually, you're going to get 218 of your colleagues to help you get it across the finish line. It's exactly the way folks want to believe this institution works, but it wouldn't work that way without folks who are tireless and do refuse to take that no for an answer. So I appreciate not just your good work on the bill, but the inspirational can-do message that sends to all of us, even when we're having our toughest days. So thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman, yields back his time. Judge
Thank you
Hayes.
very much, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, and I echo the sentiments of my good friend from Georgia regarding the overall structure of the bill and the fact that it's bipartisan. I was glad to be involved, spent lots of time talking with Dr. Murphy, particularly about concerns that he and I'm sure others share about a provision that's been in the law for a protracted period of time that allows for limitations on bed space for mental health. And I understand, I appreciate very much what you said earlier, Dr. Murphy, and that is that you didn't get everything that we need, but we needed everything that you got. And I thoroughly agree with that. But I am concerned that in the healthcare workforce section of the mental health title of cures, it expands liability protection for community health centers, but once again leaves out expanded protections for free and charitable clinics. And perhaps any of you can address it for me. I heard from the National Association of Free and Charitable Clinics, and they expressed vital concern. And I don't know whether that language is in here. I have not read all of subtitle B, but I noticed you all talking about it, so somebody must have some answer as to whether or not it was left out, or what, if anything, is a potential remedy going forward. And I'll leave it at that until someone of you gives me an answer.
If I can answer that.
Yes.
So what we have in here is that protection for providers who volunteer their time at community health centers, community mental health, the federally qualified ones. Right now, those who volunteer their time at free clinics and free centers do have that protection. If they're paid, they don't. But we wanted to allow other people to volunteer at the other federally qualified community health centers. So that's how some of those protections work in this.
I'm not sure that clears it up for me, because I still feel that the free and charitable clinics, they serve low-income people who have few options and otherwise would fall through the cracks in our healthcare system. So it's really important to me. I don't know. I accept your answer, but I find that those who need that same liability protection for the free and charitable clinic providers are not taken care of in this measure. And perhaps it's something, I mean, this isn't the last day of legislating around here, and perhaps it's something that we can start with at the outset of the new Congress. But I did want to share the concerns of those that addressed it to me. All right? All right.
Thank you very much. Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions. I expect I'll get to talk about this a good deal on the House floor tomorrow, so I will limit my comments. Just so everyone knows, none of us got everything we wanted in this bill. It's a big bill. It certainly didn't need to be a lot bigger, but even just this morning, I lost a section that was important to me. I do have the commitment from Chairman Upton that we get yet another opportunity to work on that in the years ahead, so I'm hopeful in that regard. Some of the title that dealt with interoperability when the bill passed the floor of the House in July of 2015 sort of got redistributed throughout the language of the bill. That's okay with me because I believe the intent is, I believe that it's, the bill still adheres to that intent of facilitating transparency and accountability. No one that I know believes the government should be telling doctors how to use technology, but we do recognize the taxpayers have spent upwards of $30 billion ensuring that that technology is out there. So I feel very strongly that we have a responsibility to ensure the technologies are prioritized and the needs of patients are put at the forefront. So the standards that are now going to be in place for as far as data blocking, the civil money penalties that are actually now written into law, I think those are all important as far as enforcement mechanisms going forward. I do just want to say one thing on the regeneration aspect, because that was new. We've talked about some of that in our hearings in other settings during the course of the last several years. Specifically point out Section 3033 for those who have the bill in front of them that deals with accelerated approval for advanced regenerative therapies, and I think that is critical. But also Section 3036, which establishes the standards for regenerative medicine and advanced therapies. One of the problems that I've encountered over the years is when people go to the FDA with a novel therapy that may combine both a drug, a device, and a biologic, no one knows where to send it at the FDA. And this clarifies and also provides a mechanism for appeal if someone doesn't appear to get an answer that is going to be, that is going to facilitate their drug or device or biologic being heard correctly. So it's an important aspect. I'm glad it was included. I realize that we didn't do this in July of 2015 when we did the original bill. And for those people at home who are concerned that here we are doing a big bill and after the election, this bill was passed by the House of Representatives. I went to 15 field hearings, briefings, roundtables. I mean, this thing really got a sound evaluation by the Energy and Commerce Committee. Unfortunately, it took the Senate a while to realize the wisdom of what Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Pallone had done. I'm grateful that they finally did. I'm grateful that they took action on it. We have it here in front of us today. But it is landmark. I mean, this is the equivalent of the National Cancer Institute being developed during the Nixon administration. People are going to look back on this as truly the groundbreaking work that it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to talking about this on the floor tomorrow, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, gentleman. Yields back. It's time, gentleman from Colorado.
I want to thank Mr. Upton, Mr. Gatt, Ms. Pallone, everybody, Mr. Pallone, and everybody for working on this bill. And I think, people are complaining, well, all the expenditures aren't there, but I think a big point of the bill is bringing life-saving products to market more effectively, and in many cases, that's regulatory forbearance. And I was hoping that maybe Mr. Upton could help me explain to my constituents. So what I always hear, I hear this from people developing drugs in my district, from consumers, from doctors, is, hey, the approval process takes too long and costs too much. I mean, I hear $1 billion, I hear $2 billion, I hear $700 million, I hear many years, I hear stuff's in Europe available for years before it's available here. Can you kind of encapsulate, just in a minute or two, how I can respond to my constituents that this helps, that this will make it quicker, easier, less expensive to bring life-saving products to market?
A couple things that I'd like to say. Sorry, I'm getting over a bad cough. So we had a lot of hearings. Dr. Burgess was at the one in Lancaster that Frank Pallone went to, and I went to a ton of them as well. One of the things that we learned was that the venture capitalists in the last 5 years have moved their money overseas. They've dropped their investment in the U.S. by 50% because they follow where the approvals are, and they've gone overseas. So I sent a team. I sent Joe Bart, and I sent a number of my colleagues in our committee overseas. What are they doing that we're not? And they're doing a number of things that we have in this bill. They're streamlining the process. We wanted to make absolutely certain, excuse me one second. We wanted to make absolutely certain, as Frank indicated earlier, that the safety record is going to stay there. It's going to stay safe. And that's why we went to the FDA, both the current and the former heads of the FDA, to walk through our bill page by page, the bill that we passed last year on the House floor, and make suggestions and corrections, and they did. And Andy Van Eschenbach and others who were at the FDA, they've written piece after piece. This does not weaken the standards, the safety standards that Americans expect when that FDA label is on there. So yeah, it costs a lot to bring a drug or device to market. Our sense is that by streamlining this process, at the end of the day, we're going to get these drugs and devices to market faster. And guess what? It's going to be cheap. It's going to be a cheaper route because it's not going to be as long. And the goal of reducing drug prices to the consumer is going to come down. It can't be otherwise. And that's one of the things that we want to see happen. We're tired of having these drugs and devices approved overseas, and guess what? That's where they're then manufactured. And it's our patients striving for the care that otherwise they can get someplace else that missed the boat.
I want to go to Mr. Gett first, and then I'll be happy to go to you.
Can I just add on to that? This is one of the things I'm the most proud of, and this was in H.R. 6, which we all, most of us, voted for. We streamlined the clinical trial process, the IRB process. I can tell you more about that.
Institutional review boards.
Right. Okay. We reauthorized the Rare Pediatric Disease Program. We enhance patient-based drug development. We regulate medical software for the first time. We establish a pathway for breakthrough therapies for medical devices that's parallel to the one we did for drugs just a few years ago that's been wildly successful. And we also require the GAO to study PRV programs. The other thing we do is that we improve the hiring at the FDA of people to oversee these, because one of the problems that we heard when we heard people talk is that some of these devices and drugs are so complex that we don't have people at the FDA with the technical capabilities to do that. So we fix all of that in this bill, and I could go on and on, but
I would just add that hundreds of
things
thousands
we
of
did.
people are alive today because of the streamlining of HIV drugs under the first President Bush administration. And I think that was a model that I know you looked at and learned from in this. I'll be happy to yield to my friend from Massachusetts.
Just a question. I'm all for streamlining the process. I think we're all in agreement on that. I guess the question is, where is the guarantee to the consumer that the price of the drugs will actually be at a more reasonable cost?
Well,
are we just
give you an
trusting
example.
the industry to
Give you
it the cheapest
a
drug,
real
or-
example, and I'll leave the name out, but I heard from a major device individual, and they have a product that's been approved overseas. And he was told by the FDA that they wanted another phase 3 that was going to cost him $180 million and probably a year in testing, at least a year before it was going to be done. It's fit to be tied, but that's the way it has to be. And it's he knows full well that it's going to be safe, but that cost, that $180 million that ultimately will get his device approved, is going to be passed to the consumer.
If I could reclaim my time to address this, I mean, from the business perspective, there, of course, the gentleman from Massachusetts is correct. I mean, there's other drivers. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's the fact that, Medicare can go.
Yeah, and
but in terms of this, if you're pricing a drug from a drug company's perspective, they have to recoup that investment.
I agree.
So they can price it lower, and many will, if they have to accrue $500
Right.
million.
I just want to make sure that, in fact, if we are streamlining the process and we are saving the companies money, that they will indeed provide the drug at a lower cost. Because we have seen companies that, quite frankly, have jacked up prices on drugs when just for the sake of profit. I just want to make sure the consumer benefits from this, not just the company.
Yep.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding.
And to the credit of our committee, we've actually gone after some of them on a bipartisan basis.
Good. And so, I mean, again, and those are the two things we hear. I'm glad this bill addresses it. One is the price of prescription drugs. And part of that, obviously, there's other drivers. We all know about that. But part of that driver is the approval cost. The second is the time to market. And there are life-saving drugs available in Europe today. And Americans who can afford them fly over there and get them or bring them in. But, I mean, most Americans can't because it's not part of insurance. And it might be another year or two away from approval here. So I want to thank everybody for their work on this bill. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everyone for hearing the chairman and ranking member and all who've talked about this. I agree. This has also been one of the bills that we have spent a lot of time on, and I think that's the energy, and that's where you do positive energy from what we're having. And I look forward to not only support it the first time, I want to support it again, but also appreciate, again, Mr. Chairman, you and Congressman Murphy, especially on the parts of the mental health part, which has been also something from my perspective from the military side, from the chaplain side, in which I still wear that hat as well, just like you do on the medical side. We have got a situation in our country today in which we have to take care of those situations that are of mental health, in which there has, as you expressed so eloquently, that it's not, I describe it sometimes like this. If my daughter, who's in a wheelchair, she has spina bifida, she was to roll in here, she was to roll in here, they would be people who would have sympathy for Jordan because she's in a wheelchair. But if Jordan was to walk in here and look perfectly normal, but yet say something is wrong with my mind, we would not know how to deal with that. In fact, we'd actually look different. And I think we've got to get away from that. We've got to say, you know, if something's about us is broken, we've got to figure out how we can fix it. And I do appreciate what has happened. Also, in Title 14 of the cures, we've also added legislation that y'all both have supported as well, and that's the inclusion of the Comprehensive Justice and Mental Health Act, which deals with the criminal justice system and affecting the ongoing mental health crisis there. This is something from the judiciary perspective, and that's something that I have looked at, and I go to jails locally and small jails, and my smaller counties up to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, and what we find consistently is the men and women of law enforcement having to deal with mental health issues out on the street, not just the mental health issues of citizens, but also the PTSD, TBI, the stuff that we're seeing coming back from our service members. What this will actually allow them to do is to get not only the cures part that we're looking at, but also the identification and training for our state and federal officials on how to deal with this, which not only transcends what we're doing in medical, but also takes it out into the realm of public safety and enforcement and keeping our law enforcement safe and the public safe. So I just wanted to hit this just a little bit, because really what's happening is when this language, which we've reauthorizes the Mentally Ill Offender Treatment and Crime Reduction Act, which is basically so we're not putting and using our jails as mental health facilities. So I do want to say thank you for putting that in. I look forward to supporting this. I think it is something that when we talk about it as we are now, whether it be cures for drugs, for family members, across the board, whether it be cancer, Alzheimer's, these kind of things, these are the things that we look to cure. And these are the things also that we can include in here that actually can help us deal with those that are suffering and struggling. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say thank you for the work. Look forward to moving forward. Everybody can find something wrong with a bill. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, are we moving forward? Are we helping people? And I think in this case, we are doing so in a prudent way, in a very good way. And I'm looking forward to supporting this and hope others would do the same and sort of let the chatter go outside, but say, what are we doing at the end of the day, looking at the things that have been put in this to help us long term. We've got to get away from here in Congress looking at what does it do for us today and look at what does it do for us long term. And I think this is that's a great example of it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, gentleman. Yields back to time. Gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne. Gentleman does not seek time. Gentleman from the state of Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I just want to add my voice of thanks to everybody that worked on this large piece of legislation. It took a lot of effort and a lot of time. I, too, look forward to supporting it. There have been some questions that come up, very interesting, and the gentleman from Massachusetts is no longer here, but brought up the issue of costs of prescription drugs. That's certainly a valid concern, and hopefully this will address some of those costs. But there's a lot of things to like in this. The mental health aspect of this, certainly with our veterans, is a big issue. I think the homeless issue around the country, every town in the country sees a lot of issues related to mental illness when you look at our homeless population. the streamlining of the FDA certainly is a good thing. But the thing that sticks out to me, and many of, almost every American is touched by a disease of some sort. And there's a lot of good things, a lot of good therapies, a lot of good drugs that continue to come out. But when you're in the position of needing that miracle drug now, anything we can do to speed up that process, because people's lives are at stake here, I think is just something that if this will help that and bring urgency to the process of getting cures to people who need them now, I think that's a tremendous step forward. And like Dr. Burgess said, that this would be a landmark piece of legislation if we can move that. So I just want to express my thanks to you for putting in such hard and good work on this piece of legislation. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. I'd indicated that I would defer my questions. Does the gentleman, the young chairman, wish to amplify? Yes, sir.
Included, oh, I'm sorry. If we could have, maybe I don't sense any opposition to the rule. So many times we have a rule debate and a required vote. Why not let the vote go by voice so that we can use that extra time as it looks at the day and try to give us a little more debate time within our hour that it may be normally planned, to maybe get an hour and a half or something so we can just extend it, because it's knowing that we have 34 Republican members, of which every one voted for this bill in my committee, and the Ways and Means package passed unanimously as well. A separate bill that was, really three big bills, again, 53 to nothing in committee. The Murphy bill, there's a lot of people that want to speak, and I really don't want to.
The gentleman
we can always yield back.
In fact, the gentleman is bringing up a good issue, and I appreciate it. I will tell you, there are elections on certain groups of people.
Right.
There are a number of meetings that are set up. I'll be glad to entertain that. You've come to the right place. I'd now yield time to myself, and really this is a question for the gentleman from Ohio. I engaged earlier his chairman, the gentleman, Mr. Brady, and I know that you're perhaps prepared for me. But one of my constituents, a gentleman who's vice chairman of the National Physicians Policy Council, Dr. Rick Snyder from Dallas, Texas, engaged me this afternoon about this Cures bill. And he talked to me about amending what he refers to as Part B, Medicare Part B, DME infusion drugs, and that there is a 94% reduction in that reimbursement. And the level of reimbursement only recognizes the drug component of many of the affected home infusion therapies. It does not recognize the significant cost associated with services, home equipment, and facilities such as clean rooms needed to provide the drug. I will tell you that as an industry, meaning physicians who have patients, they agree that the drug component should be adjusted, but it should not be done without leveling out the same adjustments that would be necessary to pay for this from a 2017 to a 2021 component for the home health service. The opportunity for these physicians to be able to provide this service on an at-home basis. And I engaged the gentleman, Mr. Brady, this afternoon to try and clarify that issue, and I don't know if the gentleman's prepared or not, but I would yield to the gentleman if he is.
No, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, and obviously look forward to working with you. As Mr. Hastings has said, this isn't the last train leaving the station. We got a lot more to do on healthcare, and obviously the Energy and Commerce Committee will play a role in this. But to your point, I look forward to working with you to get this done. to help beneficiaries, obviously, in the
Good.
next
Well,
session.
yeah.
And we
Thank
did,
you.
we simply
Yes, sir.
ran out of time on this, and, but we want to work together on this.
Well, I agree with that. I think that the gentleman, Mr. Brady, said to me he would address the issue as soon as we came around to the new year. Not, well, we'll look at it, well, we'll maybe think about it. He indicated to me personally, we will address the issue with an understanding that if you reduce the amount of money that is there, a patient will have to come back into the hospital setting to receive the infusion of these drugs, as opposed to the ability to be at home, at work, and to do these things. And it causes actually a significant impediment for not only costs, but really for the lifestyle and professional attribute of what a person has been able to
get
do
it.
by receiving these drugs and away from hospital.
Look forward to working with you to get it
So
done.
I do take that, and I do appreciate the gentleman, but with great clarity, I want to be able to say to Dr. Snyder, and I'm sure he's watching now, to the gentleman who will probably be handling these issues for the Ways and Means, that we would need something very quickly this next year. Thank you very much. I want to thank the panel. I recognize that there was very little difference between your ideas about getting this done. I would say to you, I too have a vision about this. Dr. Francis Collins, our distinguished head of NIH, I believe has asked for and worked with not only gentleman Mr. Upton, but really this Congress. He has spent time to come up here numbers of times to discuss with us the attributes of what success would be. It's my hope that we will continue to work with Dr. Collins, that will continue to push him and receive back his best work. I'm intensely interested, as a number of people are in this room, in a number of things, including the National Eye Institute. And the National Eye Institute is well aware that about $80 billion a year is spent on retina issues with people who receive not only benefits and services as a result of their deficiencies, but that we can turn this around with millions, not billions, perhaps 100 million. But the infusion of this has come through a lot of energy from the gentleman from Oklahoma, Tom Cole. And I have engaged Mr. Cole on this issue. I think that every member has taken time, not of their pet project, but of things that would benefit hundreds, if not millions of people that are out there. And I want to thank you, Mr. Upton, for your hard work, blood, sweat, and tears to get this done, and to thank the men and women of the NIH who will, with great blessing, receive our prayers and hopes for good things. So thank you very much. This will take care of this panel. Ms. Hanabusa, do you wish to come before the Rules Committee? The gentlewoman would please know that anything you have in writing will be entered into the record, and the gentlewoman's recognized. Without objection. Yes, ma'am. Is your mic on? It would be green. Or green? Okay, well.
What I'm proposing in the amendment is something that I've advocated, I think, since the first Congress that I've been in, and that is to add to this bill that there are Medicaid coverage for citizens of the freely associated states. These are COFA. These are the,
Oh, sorry. These are the individuals, and as we come upon the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, as we all know, after that, the atomic bomb testings was held. And the COFA, the COFA agreements, the treaties were entered into because of the testing that the United States did in the Pacific. And as you know, it affects the people of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia and Palau. And those are our three COFAs. What this bill simply seeks to do is to cure something that happened in 19
96, I believe, with the passage of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. In 1986, when the COFAs were entered into, the migrants who are legal migrants were entitled to receive Medicaid. So states to which they migrated to were able to have them covered for medical coverage under Medicaid. In 1996, it ceased, and therefore, the states assumed that responsibility. As you can imagine, only certain states, there are about 11, that have more than a substantial number of these migrants. My state happens to have probably 50% of them. And what this amendment does is simply to make it available to them, that Medicaid be available to them, if necessary, to cover their medical expenses. 3 categories are usually called upon by the legal migrants. They are education, housing, and medical. It is the medical which brings most of them to the United States in some form or another. So all this amendment seems to do is to put them back to where we were in 1986 to 1996, and I ask this committee's consideration to at least put the amendment on the floor for consideration.
Thank you very much. Questions for the gentlewoman? Questions for the
I just
gentlewoman?
support her
Yes.
amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
Want to be on record as supporting her amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Judge Hastings? Thank you very much. I want to thank you for taking time to be with us. I think that this is one of the important reasons why you've been sitting here for a couple hours to speak on an issue that's very important to you, and I want to thank the gentlewoman for taking time to come to the Rules Committee today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Sessions.
If
Thank
you'll
you, Mr.
please
Chair.
leave whatever you've got for our awesome stenographer, she would appreciate it too.
Thank you very much.
Okay, this, is there any other member that would seek to give any testimony on the 21st Century Cures Act? Seeing none, we'll now close the hearing portion of Senate Amendment to H.R. 34 and open for H.R. 6392, Systematic Risk Designation Improvement Act of 2016. I note that we are expecting 2 people. One would be the gentlewoman from Los Angeles. I would invite her to come be a part of this and welcome. And the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer. So, Ms. Waters and Mr. Lukemeyer, if y'all will please feel free to come to the table. I think, as you know, I spoke about this bill, the importance of the bill, what the bill is about at the opening of the Rules Committee meeting. We talked about how awesome Maxine Waters is and Mr. Lukemeyer, and that you would come here to represent not only your ideas on this issue, but that anything you have writing will be entered the record, and the gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Slaughter and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on H.R. 6392, the Systemic Risk Designation Improvement Act of 2016. Under the current regulatory framework for the designation of systemically important financial institutions, risk is determined based solely on the asset size of an institution, and as such, any bank holding company with more than $50 billion in assets is subject to enhanced regulatory supervision and special assessments. This approach fails to take into account differences in business models or risk posed to the financial system. This isn't a responsible basis for supervision, a fact that has been recognized by Chair Yellen as well as Secretary Lew, among other administration officials. Even the bill's author and former chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank, has said this issue needs to be addressed. During a November 20th radio interview, Chairman Frank said, "We put in there that banks got the extra supervision if they were $50 billion assets. That was a mistake." Chairman Frank went on to say, when it comes to lending and job creation, the regional banks are obviously very, very important. Hope that if we get some regulatory changes, we give some regulatory relaxation to those banks. Chairman Frank also testified to that effect before the House Financial Services Committee in 2014 and thus endorsed our bill. This week, we have the opportunity to remedy this oversight. The risk of a traditional commercial bank is not the same as an internationally active, complex firm that engages in significant trading activity. H.R. 6392 would remove the arbitrary approach taken and replace it with analysis of the actual risk presented by a bank holding company to the financial system. The bill number may be new, but the concepts are not. Discussions surrounding the SIFI designation process is one that Financial Services Committee has had for several years always on a bipartisan basis, and introduced a similar legislation in the 113th Congress. With the exception of the offset language contained in Section 6 of this bill, H.R. 6392 is identical to H.R. 1309, legislation introduced last year that attracted broad bipartisan support and garnered 135 co-sponsors. This bill closely ties the safeguards intended in the designation of a bank with real risk to the system. More specifically, my legislation would require federal banking regulators to examine not just size, but also interconnectedness, the extent of readily available substitutes, global cross-jurisdictional activity, and complexity. These are the standards used by the Financial Stability Board to determine global SIFIs. And in fact, the Treasury's Office of Financial Research has already completed a risk analysis of every SIFI using these same criteria. These are tested and accepted metrics. It's important to note that this legislation will not impact the authority of the federal regulatory agencies to oversee institutions. The focus standards set forth in the bill don't guarantee that any institution will remain de-designated, but the intent is to allow for enhanced and more appropriate oversight to institutions that could actually have a greater impact on the overall economy, financial system, and most importantly, consumers. An inefficient regulatory structure that fails to reflect the realities of the U.S. banking system can have real economic consequences. We should no longer let the SIFI process lead to marketplace disruption or penalize companies for size alone. The approach that will be codified with passage of H.R. 6392 will free commercial banks to make loans to family and small businesses across the nation. It's time to take a more pragmatic approach to SIFI designation process and, more generally, the expanding regulatory regime hitting financial institutions and their customers. It's time to actually manage risk and limit real threats to our financial system. I want to thank my colleagues for their work on this legislation, namely Mr. Murphy, Mr. Stivers, Mr. Scott, Mr. Williams, Ms. Sewell, Mr. Hill, and Ms. Sinema. Also want to thank Chairman Session for his continued support of this concept and the Rules Committee members for their consideration of this bill. Mr. Chairman, I request that the committee grant a rule that allows for expeditious consideration of H.R. 6392. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukemeyer. We appreciate your leadership of this issue. I know it's taken you a number of years, and I applaud you for your work in doing that. Ms. Waters, welcome.
Thank you very
Joe
much.
Owens recognized.
Thank you very much. Chairman Sessions and, of course, our ranking member Slaughter, who is not here yet, and members of the committee, I want to thank you for inviting me here to testify on H.R. 3692. Before I speak to the substance of this legislation, let me read to the committee a few headlines from recent news publications that I believe are relevant to our discussion today. Quote, Trump transition team pledges to dismantle the Dodd-Frank Act. Quote, Christmas has arrived early for Wall Street in the early days of the Donald Trump era. Quote, Trump administration could upend post-crisis financial reforms, weaken CFPB. Again, these are all news reports from the last few weeks. Though he campaigned on an economic populist platform, calling for an end to free trade agreements and bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, President-elect Trump's emerging transition team and strategy on financial reform flies in the face of his rhetoric. In fact, what we are seeing in the early days of the Trump era are the same Wall Street-driven special interest favors that the majority in the House has pushed for the last 6 years. H.R. 6392 is the first step in Trump's and in congressional Republicans' plan to suffocate and then eliminate Dodd-Frank. Make no mistake, this bill is not about community banks. Indeed, 99% of our community financial institutions are under $10 billion in assets and are exempt from huge swaths of financial reform. Instead, this legislation is a special interest giveaway to just 27 financial institutions. These huge banks collectively represent $4.5 trillion in assets. That is 30% of the industry currently subject to the more stringent rules that followed after the financial crisis. After the meltdown in 2008, Congress found that banking regulators failed to use tools available to them, tools that could have prevented the buildup of risk and ensuing crash. This failure resulted in the bailout of several of the largest financial firms, including large regional banks like Wachovia and Washington Mutual. As a matter of fact, you can add to that list IndyMac, Golden West, and Countrywide. When these institutions went bust, global megabanks had to step in and acquire them with the help of substantial government assistance. This has not only cost the taxpayers money, but made our too big to fail banks even bigger. As a result, in Wall Street reform, we told our independent regulators, you must do more. You must regulate these megabanks in specific ways with regard to critical measures including capital, liquidity, stress testing, and living wills. H.R. 6392 would quite literally gut Congress's directive that regulators closely scrutinize these large firms, thwart Federal Reserve Board Chair Janet Yellen's ability to regulate banks, and hand over that responsibility to whatever Wall Street revolving door appointment President-elect Trump selects to head his Treasury Department. And I guess he made that announcement today. In fact, the leading candidate for Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, serves on the board of CIT. I guess he's been appointed already. A huge megabank that directly stands to benefit from this legislation. Talk about the fox guarding the henhouse. This legislation is just another example of a long string of conflicts of interest that President-elect Trump and his team will bring to the White House and to our cabinet agencies. Finally, I think it is important to note that this legislation is really just a dangerous stepping stone for Chairman Henselin's so-called Choice Act, which the Financial Services Committee passed in September with bipartisan opposition. While H.R. 6392 suffocates Wall Street reform, the chairman's Dodd-Frank repeal bill will completely eliminate it. In fact, the bill we're discussing today amends a section of Dodd-Frank that the chairman seeks to repeal in his other bill entirely. So why is the committee spending time on this legislation when the majority's plan is to shred the entire Dodd-Frank Act come next year? It is clear that it is not the majority's intention to perfect or build upon Wall Street reform, but to dismantle it, starting with this bill and continuing into the next Congress. For these reasons, I urge a no vote on H.R. 6392, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Questions for our panelists? Gentleman from
I
Massachusetts.
just would like to ask unanimous consent to insert the opening remarks of our ranking member who couldn't be here in opposition to this bill.
Objection.
And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the statement of administration policy opposed to this bill, saying they would
Without objection.
recommend a veto. And again, I agree with Ms. Waters. I think this is coming attractions of what we're going to see with Mr. Trump and a Republican Congress, the dismantling of proper oversight of Wall Street and the financial industry, and I worry about it deeply, but I oppose this, and I yield back.
Yes, sir. Further discussion. Any questions for our panelists? I want to thank both of you for being here today. What we're trying to beat is we've got votes, and then we've got meetings afterwards. You understand that. I'm trying not to look at my members, to get them to come back here at midnight. So thank you very much. If you'll please make sure our awesome stenographer needs what you brought. Chairman, I'll be interested in a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of the Senate Amendment to H.R. 34, the Tsunami Warning Education and Research Act of 2015. The rule makes an order, a motion offered by the chair of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment of H.R. 34 with an amendment consisting of the text of the Rules Committee 114-67, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 80 minutes of debate on the motion, with 60 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 6392, the Systemic Risk Designation Improvement Act of 2016, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. This rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule makes an order only the amendment printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report, if offered by the member designated in the report, which shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and unopponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in Part B of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that? The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 6392 on open rules so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it, noes have it. Any other discussion or amendment? Thank you very much. We will now move to the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Ask for recorded vote.
Gentleman asks for a recorded vote.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Stivers? Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk report the total.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess, will be handling this for Republicans.
And Mr. Polis will handle it for the
And the
Democrats.
gentleman from Colorado will be handling this for Democrats. Look, I think we've done our work for the, in as much as we're concerned that we see right now for the week, but I do expect that there is a conference report on NDAA that is being passed around and signed. You and I both understand this will be called up immediately as soon as it is posted. It will be an emergency meeting, and it is because the conference has completed their work. So I would anticipate that it could be as early as tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'm not calling a meeting for that. I'm simply saying that I anticipate that that's what we're going to do. Questions or comments? Thank you very much. This finishes our meeting for the day.